Welcome, everyone. Steve Hobbs here from the WELLth Movement, WELLth. Welcome to this blab. We have David Savage on board with us. And just a little bit of an explanation. We're going to cover some topics around well-living workplace, 9 educating approaches. And David and I are just going to have a conversation around what that's all about. So, David, do you want to just share maybe where you're from, your website?
You bet. Thank you, Stephen. davidbsavage.com. And you can find lots of resources, videos, and access to my book, Breakthrough to Yes, Unlocking the Possible Within a Culture of Collaboration, davidbsavage.com.
Yes, and folks, he just launched it on March 22nd. So it's a new one that's out there on Kindle and on Amazon. So, yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Now, what I'd like to do is I would like to talk a little bit about my good friend, Stephen Hobbs. Stephen and I met several years ago, and he's one of the most brilliant people I know, one of the most passionate people I know, and dedicated. So in my book, Breakthrough to Yes, I always start with step number 1 is set intention. Stephen, tell us a little bit about your intention for WELLth learning and WELLth movement.
Well, the WELLth movement actually guides grandparents to fully express their legacy. There is a sense that grandparents, simply because of being a grandparent and living, they have a legacy that they are growing, building, whatever metaphor you'd like to use. But to fully express that legacy is another story. And they can do that through maybe creating a well-living workplace, involving their grandchildren in the outdoors, getting involved with a charitable opportunity. So it's really about helping them fully express their grandparenting, their contribution, their legacy through creating a legacy project and working with that. And that's what we help the grandparents do. And WELLth learning actually is the educational element, the social media word that we use. Obviously, WELLth learning, it's about learning about wealth. And if I may, wealth spelled WELLth, about well-being and well-living.
Money is an important part of all of our aspects, and this is about being well, not necessarily wealth.
Right. Well, it's kind of interesting, actually, David, is that the root of the word wealth actually came from well-being. And the sense is that as you accumulated your wealth, you could more establish your well-being. You had access to more services, and as you had more services access, you could then increase your wealth. So there is a really beautiful tie-in between these two words.
You know, we talk about grandchildren, and we talk an important part in your message and your services about legacy. Why do you connect the two, grandchildren and legacy? What may be obvious to you, but I'd like to hear your connection.
Sure. Well, from a purely selfish perspective, I did not marry, so I don't have children. Therefore, I'm not going to be a grandparent. So I'm, in a sense, going to be a foster grandparent and work with all the grandparents so I can learn a lot about that relationship, that familial relationship that grandparents have with the grandchildren. And I chose to work with the grandchildren because I also have many years involvement with children, from winter and summer playgrounds, day camps, right through to taking them on 10-day adventure canoe trips in the northern Ontario in a place called the Uganda Whitewater Wilderness area. And I just see where grandparents and grandchildren could really benefit from these outdoor experiences, and I want to help them. And then if you project 10, 15 years later, what are the grandchildren going to be doing? They're going to be entering the workforce. So maybe the grandparents can pass along through mentoring some absolute wonderful wisdom about what it's like to be in the workforce. So there is a generational tie that sort of flows through
Yeah,
there.
there's such a gap there between those of us that are getting on, very wise women and men, um, elders in many societies. We're becoming, and what I hear you saying is you're offering us an opportunity to truly be the wise person, be that one person, whether it's in your organization or with your grandchildren or their friends or your adoptive grandchildren around the world, to help them lead. I
Yes.
draw our listeners' attention to some of the messaging on your website, and we talk there about our focus is twofold: one about grandparents with their grandchildren, and then the other as grandparents who are professionals in their organizations. So let's expand that a little further, and let's share a little more about that, those twofold focus.
Well, it goes back to something that was said to me, and it really stuck. Someone said they were having a conversation with a young person, and the young person was just entering into the workforce. So in this case, it was a young woman, and she said to the chap, she said, "You know what? What I keep experiencing is a bunch of olders. I'd really like to meet some elders." And I sort of went, O and E. Just change out an O to an E, and you get this notion of elder, right? And I went, well, an elder in the community, elder in the workplace could be a mentor, but it's also the notion of elder as the grandparent into the grandchild in the relationship at home, and this notion of elder mentor in the workplace. And I just went, well, it just makes sense that you connect the two focuses. And being that your grandparent, 50 to 75, you're in that next 50 of your life, why don't bring both of those ideas together, the elder and the grandparent, and bring that into all aspects of your life? And as I said earlier, how do you fully express that, right? So that you're living your great life.
Yeah, and leaving a great legacy. So I am a grandparent. I have four grandchildren, very young. One of the things that I love doing with them is being active with them, taking them hiking, skiing, being out in the outdoors, having campfires. And that's a lot of your early career experience. So I would encourage listeners to connect with Stephen Hobbs and others and themselves. Grandparenting isn't buying stuff or writing checks or making loans. It is being with them and being in nature in particular. Um,
Yes.
what what if just in this moment, Stephen, this weekend, if some grandparents wanted some ideas on how they might do that, what comes up for you?
Well, there's this simple thing. I'm just looking outside just before we started the blab here, and it's snowing where I am. And so some people might be going, I'm not sure I want to jump outside right now with the kids, even on the weekend coming up. But then again, why not go outside and hug a tree? Go touch a tree. Go touch another tree and compare two trees against each other and see what there's that's there. The area I am, there's cedar trees, so there's evergreens, and you compare
Mm.
the evergreens against the deciduous. There's shrubs around here. There's the dogwood, and if you look at a dogwood, they have opposite the branching versus some other trees that are alternate. So you could start looking for, well, what's the different kind of features of these trees that are just sitting right here, right around you at this point in time, and then how might you, if you're on some South Pacific island listening to this, then what's the difference between tree A and tree B as you walk back to your home from the beach? And just take a look at it. What's the coloring? Just look at the features, right? And have a conversation about that and touch them. That alone, right, is a great starting point in terms of building this relationship between grandparents and grandchildren.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the natural eco living is a key element of your offering, your wisdom.
Yes.
I think about my grandson Quinn and granddaughter Sarah, 8 and 6. They talked to me about renewable energy. We share out in the Kootenay Rockies of British Columbia. We'd like to go on hikes where we can explore. Well, what's the difference between a pine and a spruce? And what do they taste like? What do they smell like? That's uh, every year my daughter Alyssa takes a wonderful picture of Sarah and I. Sarah is now 6, but the last 2 summers she's taken a picture of me hugging a 900-year-old cedar in the Island Lake area near Fernie, and Sarah hugging me from behind, basically at knee level. And it's a reminder to me how blessed I am to be in this wonderful natural world, and blessed I am to have grandkids and have that. So it's not a matter of being genetically related. Now, I want to change the focus a little bit here. You are very well known and very well respected for a lot of your organizational development work. Now, it touches on the second step about professional organization and leadership, creating your legacy there. What will you share with us about the well-living workplace?
For me, if I'm going to just take a look at the term itself, and because in the term well-living workplace is its definition, I'm just going to reverse it. It's a place of work where you live and work well together. And the tie-in with the outdoors is that it uses eco-literacy or ecological literacy concepts and practices. And for me, a well-living workplace is not about a straight line. Because if you go out in nature, there's no straight lines, right? No one really owns nature. Nature doesn't own itself either. It's just part of itself. And the notion of the well-living workplace is how can you get to a point that people are just working well together because it's just natural and organic. Unfortunately, us humans, we tend to want to complicate things, right? But when you go and you play in the outdoors, you can see where it's not complicated. It's just beautiful. And I just like to bring those kind of characteristics, that flavor, that feeling, and bring it to workplaces because I think we could certainly benefit from that. So that's what well-living workplace means, and that's why I so enjoy involving myself in it.
Well, it's curious to me that we've had this conversation. I've known you for a while. I've been looking at that phrase, and as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, wow, if you read it backwards, it also has a powerful meaning. Place, work, living well. That says a lot to me, what you're bringing together, really a holistic place of being well in your workplace. But it is a place, and it's not a place where we take off our lover hat, our father, grandfather, husband, son, grandson hat, and go do different things. It's bringing ourselves to work.
Yes, very true.
Something that I quote your book in my book. We talk about the 9 educating approaches in one of your books. I think you've got at least 4. Before we go to the 9 educating approaches, I see at least 4 Stephen Hobbs books out there. Can you just give a real quick précis before we get back into the 9 educating approaches?
Sure. There's what's called the trilogy. And they are 3 books, insight books. One's called Living Your Great Life. Another one is Creating the Well Living Workplace. And the third is Co-Creating the Well Living World. And I'm just going to preface this because in 1987, I was in Uganda working on HIV and AIDS and a tree planting program. So you can see a little bit of history around the tree story and the outdoors. And I came up to a roadblock and a soldier pointed a machine gun in through the window and touched my nose. And I'm pushing it away and it's coming back and pushing away and coming back and it starts to wobble. Other soldiers are laughing. Just this mayhem around me. and my driver is asking me questions. I'm answering him. He's talking to the soldier. You can just imagine this stuff that's going on at that point.
Wow.
And then the soldier who's standing there said to my driver, "Okay, go." And so we left, and I'm looking at the mirror, and I said to my driver, I said, "How old is that soldier?" And he said, "Well, she's about 14, 15." And I realized at that moment that here's this young woman. I was in her workplace. She was trying to save Grace and amongst her other soldiers, and she was having a difficulty keeping the machine gun up. That's why it was wobbling, and all these other things that are going on. And I said at that moment, I'm going to do something different in this world so that no person has to shove a machine gun up anyone's nose for any reason. And I came back and started working on books, and these trilogy came about, these insight books. I just needed to get some of those ideas out of me. I have them available on my website. So those are three. The Help Them Help You Manage Lead is another book, which is what we'll come back and talk about here in a second. But I just also like to share with you, because this is kind of interesting. Not a lot of people know, but I actually edited the Wilderness Remote First Aid book for the Red Cross in Canada. And so I had actually created the book around a framework of how I approach doing first aid, if I have to do it, in the outdoors, because I was an instructor trainer for Canada in Wilderness Remote First Aid. Again, you can see the
So
outdoor
you're a good
connection.
guy to have, whether
And I
you're in the
learned
bush
so
or
much.
in the boardroom.
That's right. I can take care of a lot of different kind of things. But it was during that writing of that book that I really started to consolidate a lot of ideas. But I think the book that we're going to turn to is the Help Them Help You Manage Lead, which is about the 9 educating approaches. And if I may, David, I just like to preface how that book came to be. I also spent 25 years as a whitewater rafting guide. And so I sat in the back of the boat, back of the raft, going, okay, I have to meet a new crew every half day. I didn't know who was coming in, so I have to get ready to be able to welcome them, get them ready to get into the raft and to safely go down the river, right? So what I started to pay attention to was what was the approaches that I was using to be able to get them ready. And I started to learn is that I was doing things like instructing and facilitating to get them into the raft and enjoying themselves. But as we went down the river, it's amazing what kind of conversations you get into. And I started doing some coaching and mentoring, especially with people who had business backgrounds. We started chatting, and then we started having conversations with the kids. And when we stopped for a little break, I'd show them a tree or two and just have a little instructional facilitation again, but do some mentoring and coaching. And so before I knew it, I had created this book in my head. And actually the story that threads through this book is about a whitewater rafting trip that I did with
So how would you
families.
describe how you captain those trips? What's the qualities that you're bringing as you're at the back of that raft going through very treacherous, turbulent water? What are the things that you're offering to the people that you're leading them?
Well, right at the very beginning, there is this whole notion of greeting people, what I call the hospitality portion of the trip, which continues on. But hospitality to me is actually a work, and it's around that notion of being ready to welcome those that you don't know are coming or you don't know about them. You just welcome them, and you have to have this way of showing, being present so that they feel as though they're walking into something that's going to be okay. Because you can see some of them walking towards you going, right? And you just have to say, okay, how do I get them in? And then the safety conversation at the very beginning is very much around defining the terms and concepts and getting them to agree to them. Okay, this is the paddle. This is how you hold it. This is how you do the basic strokes. And I only have to do 2 strokes, right? Forward and backward, because I use the raft and the river to do everything else. So how to then reassure them everything's okay. And explain it and have a little bit of fun. These are characteristics of just welcoming them in, and we haven't even touched the water yet. And that's that being very instructive, being facilitative as you get them towards the river. So that's just the pre part. When you touch the water, is how do you get them to feel comfortable in their paddling? So it's like, how do you get person ready to do their work, right? What are the competencies necessary? And in my case, it was paddle forward, paddle back, listen to me. And when I asked for a little bit more oomph, which is a real technical term, then they were able to give it to me. And the same thing is when you're asking people in the workplace to give me a little bit of oomph, to get into a little bit more of that high performance. How do you get them there? Well, you're going to build up this pre-level material to help them go. So I think you can start to see there's really great parallels between these. And I went so far, David, as to actually write a book called Rafting with Your Team, right? Which is action on the water, learning from the river. And I'm going to get that up in Kindle here probably in the next couple of weeks. So does that help understand? That's just getting into it. That's not even talking about going down the river. So.
Well, I want to compare and contrast to your style of leadership, your style of legacy and helping through the turbulent whitewater organizations, families, and rivers. About 20 years ago, there was a tragedy, whitewater rafting tragedy in central BC in the Alexis Creek area. There was a couple that ran whitewater rafting trips, and they did well by bringing in organizations. So, let's do some team building by scaring the heck out of each other for about 4 days on really turbulent water. And from your experience, you've done that well. Other leaders don't take that coach, servant, leader, captain approach that you do so well, Stephen. In one case, and there is a film made, I think it's called White Water or something like that. You can find it on Netflix. But this organizational leader, I think it was a New York finance organization, they came out, and the leader was just a bulldog, just a bully. He pushed. So it was all about him and him wanting this experience for everybody and really being ignorant of what was going on with his team, the fears, the concerns, the anger, the frustration, all of that stuff. This guy was so disconnected. He was going to show him he's the greatest outdoor guy. And unfortunately, the guide on the raft didn't stand up to him when things were going wrong. The guide didn't stand up. So in addition to coaching, leaders also need to be very strong. And what happened is this was one of the worst whitewater rafting guided tour tragedies in North America, where many of these executives from New York City died because they didn't take your approach. They succumbed to this hero with his huge ego, as opposed to saying, we got to get through this, all these rapids together.
Yes. Well, I think what you're speaking about is actually stepping up, the guide stepping up, people stepping up, that other person maybe stepping down a little bit, right? But I know how important stepping up and fulfilling your commitments is to this work. And the commitment might be, in this case, the safety of the crew. The commitment might be to listening to the instructions. The commitment might be is not to get into this group think or peer pressure. I think you used the word bullying. So let's step up into, let's get rid of this workplace bullying, right? Kind of idea. It's really about stepping up into the position, your mastery, your voice, your authority, and truly expressing that. And that's where I had to do that when I was guiding, but I had to do that in such a way as that it didn't scare people either, right? So I appreciate the example you're using and this notion of stepping up. But I'm going to take it one step farther because the second part to all of this is staying found. Where we left off was I was just jumping into this notion of stay found. All right. And I think this comes from the wilderness remote first aid. This is like a core concept for me, is that what happens is people get lost in their own way of doing things, or they get lost in the organization. So leaders sometimes go down these rabbit holes thinking this is the way to do it, or I'm going to be a very aggressive boss, or I'm going to be very quiet and timid in my approach. We sort of show up and step up, and then we get lost unless you stay found. And I draw this back to the wilderness example. When people get lost in the outdoors, what they tend to do is they keep walking, when in fact what they should do is make camp or settle down where they are, because if they let people know that they've gone into the outdoors, then people can find them. So what it is, it's staying found, not staying lost.
Yeah.
And what happens is when you're leading in the organization, how do you stay found? How do you stay present so that people can find you? And it's the notion of presence, right? How can you stay present while you're on that rafting trip? Well, part of that is something I have to do by doing things like having fun around the oomph factor.
Yeah.
I might say to someone, okay, when we get to the set of rapids, what I want you to do is dig in and give me a couple of really good strokes in the front, knowing full well we're fine, but I just needed to give them that little bit of oomph to feel as though that they were truly, truly contributing. But there was other times when I did need that oomph. By practicing it, they were ready to go. So that's about staying found and being with the people that you're working with.
So let's get back to the 9 educating approaches, Stephen. Let's get into the approaches. It works whether you're a whitewater guide or a CEO of an organization. Tell us more about your 9 educating approaches.
Okay, well, what I've done is I've split them up, and they're actually in my book. Might as well share the book. Help Them Help You Manage Lead. It's both on Kindle and Amazon that you can get. What I do is I break down the 9 into 4 and 4 and 1. So there are what I associate 4 with managing. And those 4 are facilitating, instructing, training, and consulting. And what I certainly encourage people who manage and lead, because I believe manage and lead, you both manage and lead. You're not a manager, you're not a leader, you're a manager leader. And there's another book that I've just written that's coming out about that one as well. And I use a little dash between them rather than say, okay, you're a manager, you're a leader, and there's something in between. No, they're together. So from the managing point with those 4, again, those are facilitate, instruct, train, and consult. What you're doing is you're basically working with the people, right? The people aspect of things. And what you're essentially doing is sort of being like a teach on the reach. Those are times when you're involved in doing more of what we call teaching. Now, on the flip side to this, all right, like the other side of the coin, managing, leading, this coin, is that you have mentoring, coaching, counseling, and shifting. And I use the word shifting for shifting your career, right? Succession movement, that kind of idea. So from the leading side, I talk about being a guide on the ride. So where do you think I got that term from? A guide on the ride, right? In terms of mentoring and coaching and counseling and shifting. Now, there is a 9th one which sort of bridges those. In my book, I call it the minstrel. Yeah. But if I had my druthers, I'd probably call it now the navigator. Wonder where I would get that term from. Navigating the river, right? Navigating people in the organizations, or people navigation. So one of the other things that I learned as well is that I would encourage all managers and leaders to know how to facilitate and instruct from a teaching perspective, and know how to mentor and coach from a leading perspective, right? From this guiding perspective. The notion of training and consulting, you can hire other people in or bring people in to work with you. The counseling and the shifting, you can bring other people in to help you to do those. But the other 4 is really great that you have it on your own. And then over time, you find yourself minstrelling, or what I would call navigating, and knowing how to truly move between them in a nice flow versus sometimes I get a little stutter in there and I don't know which one I'm doing kind of idea.
So I'm wondering about when you step in and when you step back. Stepping in feels like, okay, more directive. I want to get these things clarified, get these people engaged, hold them accountable. Stepping back almost feels to me, Stephen, like those are the moments where I'm just reveling in what my group, my organization, my family is accomplishing without my active directive involvement.
Well, if you're managing the people versus leading the person, right, you're going to have to step in when you're managing the people, because you're basically managing systems for the people, and therefore you have to instruct them in the use of it and facilitate them finding out their ideas of how to improve it and strengthen it and focus them. But you can step back a little bit from the leading point of view, not in the sense of, remember, stay found, mm-hmm. but step back a little bit, because maybe what you need to do is talk to each person about what's going on, because what you're doing is you're leading a person from system, and the system is their organization of work approach. How do they work at what's going on? And often if you just leave people to really do what they know how to do and just give them the recognition, it's amazing what individuals can get done, and then adds up to collectively getting things done, right? So there's this notion of truly stepping in, and the idea of stepping back, but not to get lost, but just stepping back a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it comes back to your metaphor about the oomph.
Yes.
Whether you need them to oomph or not around that corner, it's important that they know that they're part of getting around that corner.
Yes. Yeah, and that's where truly, I mentioned it earlier, and I'll stick by this, is that if you define the terms and concepts and agree on the terms and concepts at the very beginning of a project, and or even just to remind yourself at the beginning of a meeting what's the terms and concepts you're working with during the meeting or you're going to use in your project, that alone, right, that's stepping in and doing that, you can actually step back a little bit, because you know people have got a baseline. But you and I both know is that when we do consulting work and we come in and do some mentoring or coaching, one of the first things we do, we get people to define the terms and concepts. And I chuckle about that every time. Yeah. When people could do that very easily, but we get paid to do that quite often.
Yeah. Yeah. It provides that foundation. Mm-hmm. Now, also, there's 4 aspects with respect to managing, leading, where you ask for help, whether it's HR, consultants, hiring. Tell us more about that, Stephen.
Well, from the managing side is the training. I differentiate from instructing. Training is actually getting a person up to the skills necessary to do job right now. Whereas instructing is, okay, I'm giving you the skills and knowledge, but I'm truly wanting to give you the why behind it. Okay. So those two are a little bit different. So you being the manager, being able to explain the why behind things, you can let others train for the specific skills, and therefore you can then welcome them back in knowing they're ready to go and then support them. And the same is true from the consulting way, because you can bring in internal consultants, people from other places, because they can always see things a little bit differently than you, and then you can work with them, right? But one of the things from a managing point of view, I always encourage people to really start to learn how to facilitate, how to draw ideas from people, because here is a awesome point, if I can make it that way. The point being is that when you use the words of the people you're involved with or you're managing, you touch their heart when you use their words. But if you keep using your words, you will touch their head, but you're unlikely to get to their heart. And one of the things we've got to do is facilitate, find their words, use those words to help them get involved, so that when you go to lead them, right? This notion of coaching and mentoring. And I always make the differentiation between the two of those as well. Is coaching is asking the questions of the coachee, whereas the mentee is asking the questions of the mentor,
Yeah.
right? So the coachee is being asked the questions that gives them to the point of what's your accountability, what's your timelines, what is it you can do, what's systems, what things can you improve upon, whereas the mentee is asking the questions of the mentor to get at the lived experience of the mentor.
Yeah.
So to the points then of counseling and shifting, is those are, you need to know enough about them, but you need to bring people in because they're far more um, competent to do those than you are, but you need to know the basics to be able to make that work.
Yeah, I really want to stress the point about touching the heart in addition to the head, because they're both important, and the spirit. The one of the things that I've learned as a speaker and consultant, and following people like Stephen Hobbs, is we can have hallelujah moments in these courses, in these workshops, in this mentoring coaching, but 2 months after, unless you do the work, it's lost. And the best
Mm-hmm.
way that people remind themselves to do the work is when they remember how they felt as opposed to what they thought. Because feeling is a strong motivator. So I really want to underline what you just said, is get people into their hearts as well as their logical prefrontal cortex, so that they have a
Mm-hmm.
feeling of success, of legacy, of mentoring, coaching, a feeling of their own leadership.
Yes, I agree. And one of the ways that I suggest people to do, and it comes from a thought to feeling, and then the feeling back to the thought, is creating a framework. Something people say, okay, create a bucket in which to work with, or create a metaphor or a simile or something like that that you can work with. I like, you can use whitewater rafting and whitewater, right? There's a story you can build there. Or there's an image, and what does that feel like? Because then you can bring the feelings to that metaphor. And how's it going? Is the bucket being filled up? Is it being filled up with the correct things? And you go, well, yeah, it's looking kind of, no, it's looking kind of murky. I don't kind of like that. You can start to associate feelings with the thoughts and be able to work it. So framing, providing a framework, is a really important idea for people to work with. And I write quite a bit about that in my book that's be coming out on Kindle, that people will be able to find on my work site. Let's try this website as well.
Well, let's be really clear. Um, who who can best be served by you? Who are your ideal clients, and what's their pain? What's the thing? Let's really try to define your service and the focus of your work. Who is best served by Stephen Hobbs and wealth learning, wealth living?
Right. Well, it's the grandparents, and so they're the 50 to 75 years young people, and they're looking at this notion of legacy. They have reawoken themselves to the fact, I'm going to be departing this place, and maybe I might start up my own business as an entrepreneur, or I'm in an entrepreneur role and maybe I want to leave it. So there's this movement at WELLth Movement. There's this movement that's taking place in their lives. But what they're starting to wake up to is that, hang on a minute, there's some things that I'd like to set up. Might be my financial giving. It might be some notes that I'd like to leave with people. It might be I want to write my autobiography so that I can give it as a gift. There are all these different aspects of life that are starting to well up in them. But I'm also really interested to assist those who have an eco-consciousness, or understanding the environmentally friendly aspects of life. And if not, if you're interested in it, you can certainly get involved. So then that brings out this whole connection to the grandchildren and the outdoors and trees. But it also links to because the grandparents are also professionals, they are working in organizations as manager leaders or as executives or even entrepreneurs, how do they want to be remembered upon leaving the workplace? They're not at their eulogy, they're just leaving their workplace or they're leaving their place of work. How could they leave concepts of the well living workplace with them? How could they model being an awesome mentor? How can they transfer what they know to the younger people through mentoring and coaching and maybe even instructing? So it's a 50 to 75-year young people who are eco-conscious, environmentally friendly, have grandchildren or would like to support children, and are managing leading workplaces and how to use this ecological platform to be able to live your great life and create the well-living workplace.
What fear is a motivator.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night and think, holy crow, holy crow. I was trying to avoid using the CR word there. Holy cow, Stephen. I better do this. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I'm going to be sad that I didn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's a strong motivator. There's also a lot of craziness in the world right now, a lot of fear-based politics, a lot of fear-based media. What I'm sensing is your work actually allows grandparents, grandchildren, and organizations really to have a special and different relationship, a loving relationship, and love does deserve its place in the office towers in downtown Toronto, downtown New York, Los Angeles. It is Beijing. It is
Paris.
Yeah. It is having each other's back. Like I'll accept my boss Stephen driving me hard and holding me to account if I trust him. And it's really having that space from fear to vision, possibility.
Yes.
And I guess the other thing is we all will pass away someday. It's not a tombstone. It's a memory. It's I remember this guy Stephen Hobbs because that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and that's why it's the notion of living from your legacy.
Yeah,
is that you have a legacy set up and you've sort of imagined it, that you've manifested it, and how do you then materialize a life that you're actually living from that legacy story and letting it unfold and contributing. It's a bit of a lighthearted way of looking at it, I hope, but upon your death, you get a eulogy. Why not contribute to that eulogy with your legacy project outcomes, your legacy notes, your legacy insights that then can be woven into it, even to the point of this is how you would like your death to look like your ceremony. And so you probably heard of things like a funeral celebrant or a wedding celebrant. Well, I like to think of myself as a legacy celebrant. And that's what I mentor to, is how do you live from this notion of legacy in your life today?
Yeah. Yesterday, I was listening to a podcast, The Age of Influence on CBC. I love it because it's a focus on marketing. And one of the things that they talked about in The Age of Influence was ego and importance and reputation and brand. So in Japan, apparently, there are very successful organizations where you can rent people for your funeral. You can rent people for your wedding. You can rent people for your graduation. It would save face by making sure you have good-looking, successful-looking people show up at these critical life events. Holy cow. Let's not do that.
Yeah. Well, there's all different kinds of ways. It's even like, I know we're down the death story here, right? You're passing, but you can actually get yourself placed into a pod bag with a tree in it and therefore become a tree,
Cool.
right? That's now available to you, right? If that's what, rather than doing in the casket, you can do this, become a tree, really actually be part of nature in a completely different way,
Wow.
right? So it's
So
kind of fun when these things are available to you, right? That's all part of your legacy story that you want to create and share with people.
yeah,
That's important.
yeah. So let's make this personal. I know that I write about collaboration and negotiation because I want to learn about collaboration and negotiation. You've invited us, invited our listeners, invited me, Stephen, to imagine the legacy that we would like to create. What's the legacy that Stephen Hobbs would like to create?
Well, I set up in 2004 a donor-directed fund at the Calgary Foundation. And so I have been putting some money into that and funding experience-based programs for children in the outdoors in the Calgary region. However, I want to expand that now through what I call Legacy Project 444 or Legacy 444, which is to put about 4.44, which is where the 44 comes in, $1 million into that fund to support children and trees programs around the world, which I call Right to Shade. And right is actually spelled WRITE. And the reason being is that I've been in places in the world where there isn't really the shade for the children to sit and read and write. They might be out in the blaring sun, or there's no roof or whatever. There's just lots of different kinds of situations. So my legacy is to fund that donor directed fund and set that up as an evergreen contribution. And I'm going to do that through, I'm now working with a wonderful creative writer, and she's helping me to create a whole series of children's books and adult books around a magical forest that I've created. And so how can I leave that as an evergreen legacy that keeps funding to be able to fund the Right to Shade programs around the world? So that's my legacy.
Now, thank you for that. That is fantastic, and I know you as somebody that's been a lifelong servant, donator, giver. Let's turn it around. What are 3 things that you offer? So if I wanted to come to you, what are the things that I could contract you for, or buy from you, or receive from you? Just I know that there's hundreds. Just in this moment, Stephen, what are 3 things that you're offering?
Well, the first thing is this notion of a legacy guide. Some people call it legacy coach. I call it guide. And what I'm doing is, you may be confused about where you're going with your life and your 50 to 75 and your next 50. You know you want to have a bit of legacy. You're not quite sure how to put that together. You're interested in it. We can spend some time together and sort of sketch all that out. And I have really wonderful tools and techniques that I can bring things out through something even as simple as, what is your word for the world?
Mm.
And each of us, we have a word that we can frame. Remember I talked about the framework, the word that you can frame up what your legacy story is about, and then be able to create that. So that's one area. Another area is, you may have this really great idea, what I call legacy project. You want to involve some people at work and maybe your grandchildren or one or the other, and you just don't quite know how to get it off the ground without it becoming, whoa, like this thing is massive. And so I can help out from a project management point of view as we work with a group of people around their legacy project. So I set up what I call the boot camp, which will be coming later in the spring. Probably I might lean a little bit more into the fall when we do our first big one. I'm just going to do some small ones, and then take them into what I call the 91-day challenge, which is take their idea and put it into action, let it happen, and working together. And we do it from a, David, collaborative point of view. And the third thing that's available to people uh, is around a or what I call mentor heart, based on mastermind principles. And what we're able to do is work together to be able to figure out ways in which we can do and be and have this legacy in our lives. But you may not have a project right away, or you have a project and you want some support from some other people. This notion of mentor heart will be available in the fall, and it will be like sort of like a membership continuity program that we get together and we talk about things. And one of them will be one of our meetings will actually be held in a resort somewhere in the world that has an eco basis to it. So we will be actually visiting an ecological reserve or an eco project of some kind, so that people can actually just weave a bit more of this eco consciousness, environmentally friendly aspect into their lives.
Well, thank you so much. A number of these things are coming up. You also have so many offerings, services, packages, books available. Remind us again before we close out today, Stephen, how do people connect with that, connect with you? What contact information and I guess any final comments that you want to share with us today?
Certainly, and a great point about it. A lot of it coming up. Those are sort of the bigger projects, but there is this whole notion of the legacy guide and the books and papers and things that I can really work with people now. They're ready to go and just support. The way to get a hold of me is WELLth Movement, WELLTH movement.com. There is the notion of wealth learning. So on Twitter, I'm Wealth Learning. You can get a hold of me on LinkedIn, Stephen Hobbs, Calgary. You can get through the Facebook. You can reach out there. There's the WELLth Movement on Facebook. I'm actually got a Pinterest site up and going, and I'm pinning tree pictures and things about workplace up there, and it's Wealth Learning as well. And just reach out through the website. There is a contact form there, and be happy to have a conversation with anyone. There are actually a couple places there. If you go, you can actually book a free 15-minute consult. And we'll just sit down, and I guarantee that you'll come out of there with a couple of ideas, even if we don't work together. I'm just willing to help.
Yeah, I think that is. I would highly recommend anybody take advantage of that 15 minutes, because oftentimes I don't know what I don't know, but I have this sense I want to talk to somebody like Stephen, and in 15 minutes he can take me there. He can clarify for me. He can challenge me. He can serve. So I'd really recommend that one-on-one conversation.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks, David, for that. Yeah.
Well, last comments. We're about to close out here our hour, Stephen. First and foremost, I want to thank you for allowing me to interview you. As you know, and one of the key people in my book, my book is dedicated to our grandmothers and our grandfathers, our granddaughters and our grandsons, and all of those of us in the world that know that leading from we is far more profound than leading from me. And that's who you are. So there's a real synergy between our offerings and our intentions and the legacies that both of us want. So the closing is yours, Stephen, and thank you. I hand the mic back to you.
Well, thank you very much, David. And as a final thought from myself would be is when you listen, you learn. When you share, you educate. So please be aware is that really improve your listening, and that'll improve your learning. Improve your sharing, that improves your educating. And the world needs more people who know how to listen, learn, share, and educate. So I would encourage everyone to take that to heart. But also, I'd also like to celebrate again Mr. David Savage and his book. And do you have a copy
Actually,
of the book?
I don't, again, but I will share something that's an important part of the book, which is the 10 steps.
Oh, there you go. The 10 steps, which is on your website, which is davidbsavage.com. And I would go and celebrate with him having his book just come out, both on the Kindle version and the soft covered versions are up through Amazon. So thank you, David, for being here. And I guess with that, then I will wish everyone a wealthy day, and we'll catch you on our next blab. You'll start to notice that I will be running what's called Saturday Morning with Steve, and it will be for grandparents around all the different ways in which to take a look at legacy and how it expands in their lives. So with that, take care, everyone. We'll catch you again.